I guess it was a few years ago on one of the many occasions that my friend Andy and I met at a Barnes & Noble to grab a coffee beverage and talk, that we were about to receive our beverages and pay when he noticed something at the point of purchase. It was a little package called Stroopwafel, and he said, "Have you tried these? They're really good." If you're not familiar with Stroopwafel, what it is it's this thing out of the Netherlands. It's a snack or a dessert, I guess is a better way of putting it. And it's two thin waffles, and between them is a layer of sweet goo, sugar, butter, whatever, I'm not really sure. I normally don't buy stuff like that because I maintain my awesome physique through totally wholesome consumption. It's one of the ironies of my existence that you can border on morbidly obese without ever eating fat. And I said, sure, I'll try it. It looked small enough to be harmless anyway. So we received our drinks, repaired to our table, and I lustily tore open the package and was about to have my virginal Stroopwafel moment when he said, "No, stop, don't! There's a trick to it." And he unpackaged the small waffles, and he uncapped his coffee, and he perched the Stroopwafel over the mouth of the coffee cup, which the circumference matched so that the waffle straddled the cup perfectly, and he sat back with an obvious sense of accomplishment, and he said, "You have to let the heat of your coffee gently melt the interior of the Stroopwafel to get the full flavor effect." So I shrugged and I did it, but it bothered me. It's not that he was giving me fundamentally incorrect instructions. I mean, if you go to the Wikipedia page for Stroopwafel, there's even a picture of just that, a Stroopwafel perched on top of a coffee cup being gently liberated from its unheated state. But I felt stressed. I felt really tense about it because, first of all, the foam on my cappuccino was evaporating as I was waiting for this, and the foam is my favorite part. Can you be more effete? Second of all, when he told me that enough time had passed, it didn't seem like much had changed. My Stroopwafel was like the date that we've all been on where it was clear that our partner, whatever he or she was expecting, it was not you, and therefore remained stiff and cold until the evening could be brought to an early termination. Second of all, when I got around to trying it with the remaining Stroopwafel in the package, my drink had lost enough heat that it had no more chance of melting the Stroopwafel than a single match does of defrosting a frozen mastodon. And I have bought them on some subsequent occasions, and I have tried it both ways, and I just don't see the difference. And ultimately, I just stopped buying them because the whole experience feels awful to me now, like I'm failing to live up to somebody's expectations. Now, no matter what I do, I feel that I'm doing something wrong. Just a few minutes before recording this, I went downstairs to make myself a cup of tea this time, and I noticed that when my wife and daughter went shopping yesterday, they had bought an entire bag of mini Stroopwafels. And my whole mood, my outlook for the day changed. Now, every time I visit my kitchen, until such point as they consume the entire package, I am going to be confronted with my own failure to live up to the standards of Stroopwafel consumption. This may seem silly to you, and it is silly, but it's also the way my entire personality is built. Some deep part of my brain actually became depressed at the idea that there is a bag of Stroopwafels in my house. I wish I wasn't like that. That's just a very trivial version of a defect in my overall personality, which is that I have a very hard time letting things go, whether they're injuries done to me or, for that matter, injuries I've done to other people, because, like all of us, I do not always live up to the standards that I've set for myself. I don't think it's ever intentional. I've never in my life sat down and said, I really want to screw this other guy, really want to take advantage of them in some way. I just don't think on those lines. I've known people who thought on those lines, and I don't relate to them. And I am no saint. I have been sometimes victimized by those people, and I am not above sitting here and praying that they get hit by a bus. But I will not be the one driving the bus. If the universe is going to do that, you go, universe. But on the rare occasions that I have done more than just passively and perhaps impotently had bad thoughts, when, even if it's inadvertent, the outcome of my actual action are that some hurt is done to somebody else, I feel terrible, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed for forever. And I still interrogate myself about those years later. And I have had friends, relatives, psychologists say, you know, how many years ago was that? Whatever incident we're talking about. I think it's time you let it go. But I can't. I keep coming back to it, and it's because shame, as I've discussed in previous episodes, shame is the most toxic of emotions. And if you have that on tap, it's a poison. It's a poison when you do it to somebody else, when you rub their nose in their failings, and it's an even bigger poison when you do it to yourself. I wish I didn't have that. I never know who's listening exactly and if they took the prerequisite courses. So if I say Walter Johnson, you know who that is, right? Guy who pitched from 1907 to 1927, won 417 games with an ERA of 2.17, was so fast that there's stories about batters walking away from the plate after taking only 2 strikes, and when the umpire said, "Hey, you've got a strike left," telling him, "You have it, I can't do anything with it." He was also a legendarily nice guy, and someone who worried quite a bit about the effects his stuff might have if it got away from him. Ty Cobb used to say that he hit well against Walter Johnson, and he hit about 370 against him, which was his lifetime average against the field, because he felt free to dig in. He knew that Johnson worried too much about hitting a batter to ever brush him back. That's not 100% true. Johnson hit a lot of batters. He hit about 10 a year. Over 200 for his career, led the league a couple of times. Some of that may just be a function of the fact that he was throwing well over 300 innings a year. Not everybody was. But even if it was just on volume and not intent, he's the all-time leader among post-1900 pitchers. Even though this was just part of the game back then, Johnson felt he had a special responsibility to be careful because he knew he threw orders of magnitude harder than everybody else. And there were no batting helmets back then. Cobb said, "If it hadn't been for his kind nature, he'd have owned me." Early in both their careers, Cobb actually struggled against Johnson, but what tipped Cobb off that he might be able to exploit this, let's call it a weakness, on Johnson's part was an incident on August 10th, 1915. This is from Henry W. Thomas's book, Walter Johnson, Baseball's Big Train. Pitching at home against Detroit, Johnson hit Tiger third baseman Ossie Witt in the forehead with a curveball. Witt fell unmoving and didn't open his eyes for several minutes. Johnson rushed in and stood over him at the plate, his face white as a sheet. "The world stopped moving for a while when that ball connected with my cranium," Witt remembered. "Johnson thought I was killed, and I guess I thought so myself, so far as I was able to think at all." Witt was okay long-term, although he later had a legendarily awful managerial career. But nonetheless, Johnson couldn't pitch for the rest of the day. He completely lost his effectiveness and had to be pulled. Thomas writes, as Milliken of the Post put it the next day, "When Walter Johnson hits a batter, both are usually through for the day." Well, I'm like that too. As I said, I still agonize about things that are years out of my control, that were out of my control the moment I push send on an email or let my mouth form the words, and I may sometimes have reasons, and I may sometimes have excuses. And it's worth remembering that reasons and excuses are sometimes mutually exclusive things. Having one does not necessarily mean that you are entitled to the other. I'm still weighed down by these things and I can't get out from under them. Like Walter Johnson, I find it hard to accept that the transgression is in the past and therefore inalterable the moment the pitch leaves your hand. So he and I are kind of alike in that regard, except for this one key difference. He was crippled if he injured a batter. I'm crippled because I can't eat Stroopwafel right. I'm Stephen Goldman, and this is the Infinite Inning Baseball Podcast. Well, hello there. The race between your country and the nation of Jobania to colonize the first exoplanet nearly destroyed both of you, both perfecting faster-than-light travel at roughly the same moment. You each launch simultaneously. After a sleep of 10,000 years, you awake to an Edenic paradise. Landing on the surface, you find an Amazon delivery center and a Jeff Bezos hologram standing there saying, "Yeah, we've been here for 100 years already. Can I offer you a Prime membership?" And perhaps Episode 20. Rapid 2-century delivery on packages to Alpha Centauri. Welcome back to the show. I have a slightly different kind of episode planned for you this week, whereas normally in this spot I would be telling you another story, and then I'd be joined by the week's guest, in this case Cliff Corcoran of Sports on Earth, in his usual spot, and we talk about all kinds of pennant race-related matters, and we also take a trip to the zoo. And he'll be along in a moment, but before then, I have, instead of a story, one other guest, a brief interview with Major League Baseball's Ambassador for Inclusion, Billy Beane. Now, just because everybody gets this confused, this is not Billy Beane, the executive with the Oakland A's, the Moneyball guy. This is Billy Beane, the former outfielder, who is one of the most prominent former Major League Baseball players to publicize his homosexuality, and in the years since has been engaged by baseball to concentrate on issues of inclusion. This came about because I received a press release from baseball, which I will share in part with you. Program seeks to reduce the incidence of bullying in schools by igniting the compassion of youth. Major League Baseball announced today that it will be working with ESPN on its bullying prevention initiative called Shred Hate, an innovative program created to put an end to bullying in schools and help youth choose kindness. No Bully, a nonprofit that trains schools how to activate student compassion to eradicate bullying and cyberbullying, will work directly with local school districts through this program. Baseball Commissioner Rob D. Manfred Jr. said, "Young people should be able to enjoy a positive and formative time in school and in sports. Students who are experiencing anything less deserve our support. Major League Baseball and our clubs believe in creating respectful, non-discriminatory, and anti-harassment environments in our ballparks, clubhouses, and front offices. We are proud to extend that approach through Shred Hate as we work with our partners at ESPN and No Bully to make a meaningful impact on the development of our society's future leaders." And I thought, great, I think that's an incredibly worthy program, and I'd like to support it in some way, and I asked to speak to somebody, and baseball offered me Bill Beane. This is apparently something that he's spearheading. I want to emphasize, as you will hear me emphasize in the discussion with Bill, that this is something I'm entirely supportive of. Although bullying was not a huge part of the difficulties I had in school as a child, I certainly encountered it and saw others encounter it, and I know just how distracting it can be when you dread going to school or leaving school to walk home because you're just not safe in that environment. Distracting is much too weak a word on my part. When you're a child and you have this existential dread of going to school or coming back from school or being inside the school because something bad might happen to you, learning is the last thing on your mind, and you don't hear a word anybody says in terms of 2 plus 2 or the ABCs. I was also curious about how baseball handled these things in their own clubhouses, because we know that players from Ty Cobb to Bernie Williams were harassed in their own clubhouses by players who, for whatever reason, just didn't like them. The stories of former Yankee outfielder Mel Hall harassing a young and apparently sensitive Bernie Williams are legendary, and I'm sure it is no consolation to anyone involved, perhaps the opposite, in fact, that Mel Hall is now serving a 45-year prison sentence for sexually assaulting children, that other people had to be abused, that minors had to be abused before Hall got his just desserts, in no way balances the scales. Better that none of it had ever happened, and had there been some kind of intervention at the time that recognized that both victim and abuser were in need of some kind of help, we'd be living in a much better world now. A lot of people would be living in a better world now. And if this program, 20 years down the road, averts something like that, well, more power to it. And I wanted to ask about those kinds of things because I think part of baseball's interest in this, just beyond good citizenship, is that today's kids are tomorrow's players. So I was looking forward to the conversation, and I think it's a good conversation, but I want to be candid with you that it wasn't quite what I anticipated, and I think I kind of screwed it up. We had to reschedule a few times, and I was having some technical problems getting the phones to connect, and then I was told that instead of the 30 minutes with Bill that I had been anticipating, he had a hard and fast meeting about 10 minutes after we began. So by the time all was said and done and we got on the phone, I was very nervous, very flustered, feeling very disorganized, and I garbled a key question. And what I was trying to say is, eradicating bullying from schools is a very heavy lift, given that children are inculcated, indoctrinated in all kinds of prejudices and bad behaviors from so many sources in their lives that you'd think would be stronger than any program, including their parents, their friends, their political and religious leaders, things they find on the internet, and so on. And so I was trying to say, this goal of eradicating bullying, it's going to be pretty hard, isn't it? But I think what came out was, It's just not worth it, is it? At least that's how Bean seemed to react. Now, as you'll hear by the end of the program, we ended up on the same page, but I'm still not sure that he wasn't telling me off for a while. I'll leave that up to you. Here's Billy Bean, Major League Baseball Ambassador for Inclusion.
You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a differing
I'm pleased to welcome my next guest, former Major League outfielder and current Major League Ambassador for Inclusion, Bill Bean. How are you, Bill?
I'm fine. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Major League Baseball is teaming up with ESPN for a program called Shred Hate, which uses something called the No Bully program to teach children not to bully in school systems. I love it when baseball steps out of the strict boundaries of the game and takes on a greater citizenship role. How did this collaboration come about?
A part of my message, since I was brought back as the first ambassador for inclusion, I felt that a natural extension or growth of expanding our workplace code of conduct conversations was to, empower our communities and create a anti-bullying or bullying prevention program, because I felt like it allowed us to embrace the entire diversity conversation and sort of interact that with our youth programs. Part of grooming and teaching baseball and making kids love baseball is to also share a message and try to create well-rounded citizens the best we can. I think baseball has always had that in mind. So in that spirit, I have some good friends at ESPN, and their corporate citizenship division does some great things. And we sat down. They have worked with a nonprofit organization called No Bully, and had sort of beta tested an or bullying prevention campaign with their X game. And a couple of my colleagues here, we really like that formula. And it's been a long, 9 to 12 months of working out a relationship, a game plan, an organization, and we're just super, super excited to take our message. We've really worked hard on educating our players, helping them understand how each and every person that puts on a uniform is a role model in our sport, and now we hope to engage them in front of kids when the opportunity permits in our community. And my vision for Shred Hate is that someday it will be entrenched in every community where we have a Major League Baseball club. And that's a long-range goal, but we're rolling it out in 3 cities, Minneapolis, Chicago, and then Washington, D.C. as well in October. And I couldn't be prouder of baseball's people that a part of this, the Office of the Commissioner, believing in it and funding it, putting some resources behind it.
It's a laudable goal because certainly in all walks of life, not just in baseball, it's difficult to achieve your full potential if, emotionally you are not committed to doing what you're doing, and it's hard to be emotionally committed if somebody is attacking you in some way when you go into anything, whether it's a major league clubhouse or a little league clubhouse or your school. I was curious about how heavy a lift this is, because baseball is a melting pot of many religions, nationalities, and so on. Almost every state in the union is represented in clubhouses, many countries around the world, and not everyone is going to have this kind of background in inclusion, in diversity, in tolerance. And I wonder how things work when ball players who have not had that kind of experience encounter those who have.
Well, the beauty of the program is that it's not asking baseball players to educate the kids. That's just a small portion of, mostly it's the spreading the word in our communities of what baseball stands for. Now, the program has 3 nonprofits that will be creating the curriculum and implementing the education. Our baseball players will come at signature tentpole events to help create or elevate the message. They'll share maybe perhaps if they have an experience that that they have learned along the way. And I think that, your point about baseball being such a diverse audience of players, of fans, you have multiple languages, multiple religions, is a perfect example of why this program we are the destination that it should start. Bullying does not discriminate against anyone. Everyone that is a parent, everyone who has a little brother or sister, a niece or a nephew, understands how easy, since the age of social media, how cyberbullying has become an epidemic, how we relate to each other, and for a kid to be afraid to just walk to school and walk home literally is the incentive for me, like trying to create an environment that makes it cool not to be that bully or not to isolate a child who might be different, look different, taller, shorter, thinner, wider, speaks a different language, has an accent, curly hair, comes from a different city, moved into town, in the middle of the school year. There's infinite reason, whether your sexual orientation is different, whether you're hiding that or it's or projected upon you and it's not true. There's just no how you dress. And I think that makes it very, very relatable. And the core of the inclusion message that started or was really elevated when I was brought back to baseball as the first former major league player to talk to our major league players about being gay and why I quit in the middle of my career just when I was starting to become a pretty good player. And I think that we can fold any message into the anti-bullying curriculum, and it's relatable because it's going to intersect with something that matters to each and every kid in that audience or a parent. The ultimate message we would love to convey when a parent is trying to select something for their child to participate in at the age of 6 or 7, we want them to, at the very least, know what baseball stands for. And if you're a single parent or a child of a mixed-race kid and you move to a new community, all these kinds of things, a child is, we want them to know that no matter what is unique to you, baseball has their arms wide open, whether it's just coming through the turnstiles at our games. We want our messaging to be consistent and inclusive, and that is a monumental task. But for me, the intersection of our youth events, our RBI programs, our play ball is really what Commissioner Manfred has made his signature as a priority to not only grow the sport, but to convey the values of Major League Baseball. And I think that they saw an alignment with Shred Hate and the understanding of, how important it is to be an example. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's no different than when I am talking to players. An adult, a child, they're going to be what they're going to be, but we can't assume that they know, what is the foundation of the message behind, our sport. And we have to give players, they have to understand that there's a responsibility that goes with wearing a major league jersey and being part of one of our 30, brands of baseball that we have worked so hard to cultivate. Shred Hate is just an incredible opportunity to bring an inclusive, generous message of love and unity into the communities near our baseball teams.
As someone who's been through this, and all of us, or many of us, have been certainly in our childhood bullied, at least in some way, but as someone due to their life experiences who may have had a deeper involvement with this kind of oppression, what do you think the value is of having the Major League Baseball brand and having Major League Baseball players, ultimately as ambassadors, involved in this? What does the power say of someone who is in that situation, of someone who is being endangered in their life or miserable in their life, and they can know that, say, Giancarlo Stanton is on my side on this? Do you think that has a positive effect?
It's going to save lives, plain and simple. If you talk to anybody who's worked in the anti-bullying space, they will tell you that 85% of all tragedies that have taken place for children who decide to take their lives or harm themselves were literally one conversation away from that not taking place. And for me, knowing that we're creating a destination, the 3 nonprofits, No Bully, DoSomething.org, and the Crisis Text Line are all available to every kid free of charge. DoSomething.org is an online website. Crisis Text Line all 4 major phone carriers. It's free texting. They've answered over 28 million text messages, and I believe for young kids, especially in middle school level or over the age of 10 per se, the possibility that they would text someone that something is going negatively in their life is much greater than them picking up the phone and talking about it. I just think there's a different level of intimacy, if you will, that allows confidence to message someone something. And if someone gets a text message that is feeling like the world is coming to an end and says, hey, let's talk on the phone or tell me what's going on, and they start a conversation, whether it's back and forth, to divert their attention for a moment and make them feel connected or loved, or that they can talk to somebody that's going through a similar experience or can understand what it feels like to be them, that's going to save some lives. And there is nothing more worthwhile than to give a child a second chance at something when they felt like they didn't have a future or hope. And I don't care where you come from or what language you speak or what religion is closest to your heart. That's something that is valuable to anybody. And if, for me, I will fight till the last day that they allow me to keep working in Major League Baseball to make this a priority. And I could not be prouder of the people I work with and around for them understanding and believing in this. Instead of standing up in front of a bunch of players and lecturing them about what they should and shouldn't do, we have taken a different perspective and allowed them to make their own decisions. And now, after they allow them to make their own decisions, once we have given them information that is a resource. And we have found almost across the board that everybody has a clear understanding that unity and togetherness does not have to mean you have to change who and what you are, but to be a part of something greater. There's a responsibility to take care of each other, and we want to create that energy in the classroom. And if our major league players, if the only thing that they're able to add to this is just to be an image that inspires the 30, 40, 50 kids in each classroom that they get to say hello to, and make them remember the word shred hate and find that destination, then they have done something bigger than hitting any home run or signing a multi-million-dollar contract. It has affected a life in a positive way. And that's the beauty of my job at baseball. We have a wonderful product. Our sport is growing. Our players, we have superstars in every part of the diversity spectrum that are just so inspiring. And I want to take a sliver of that energy and impact kids in a way that they can look up to someone and feel like they are loved or they are a part of something if they want to be a part of it themselves.
Bill, I know you're pressed for time. I just want to say that you put it wonderfully. I think that it's great for people to know that you're involved with this and that you are an architect of this program because, as you said, you could be talking to players, and players are, as we said, a diverse group, but if you can't put aside and embrace a child, then there's no greater thing that you can do. And you're taking this brand and this pulpit that you've been given and you're turning it to positive effect, and I think it's a wonderful thing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking a minute to talk about it for us, how we elevate the program. That's how it's going to succeed. So you've made a contribution to it today as well, and that means a lot to me. So anytime we get back on the air together, I wish you good luck with your show, and I'm glad that you're a baseball fan.
Well, thank you, and sometime we'll do that, and I'll ask you what it was like to play for Sparky Anderson and with Trammell and Whitaker and guys like that.
You got it. It was an honor and a privilege. The time went by fast, but I remember each and every minute of it, that's for sure.
Well, maybe that wasn't as awkward as I thought it was. I want to thank Bill Bean, and I want to highlight one resource that he brought up, crisistextline.org. Text 741-741 from anywhere in the United States, and you can talk to a trained crisis counselor. Don't listen to the black dog and do anything rash. Text someone and listen to them instead. I'll be back with Cliff Corcoran in just a nanosecond. Well, boys and girls, I know you were looking forward to having that colonoscopy today, but something better has come along, so you better seek a postponement. It's the man of 1,000 baseball caps, Cliff Corcoran. How are you, Cliff?
Doing well, Steve. Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. It's never a surprise. I wouldn't change it. Unless you were indicted for something really heinous, I guess. But, otherwise, it's been a long, fruitful relationship, and I have to actually say I would stick by you even if you were indicted for something really heinous, because, why change now?
I appreciate that, Steve, and I'll do my best not to call you on it.
It's still early.
It is at that.
So since we last talked, you've been traveling the globe again, and I actually, because my memory in my old age here is quite porous, I don't remember where you'd gotten off to, so to speak, in a nice way, this time. So, but why don't you refresh my memory? Where have you been?
Far away and exotic Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Just family beach vacation. We take 1 week every summer, and we took this one this past week to Cape Cod, stopped at the Mystic Aquarium, and watched some beluga whales try to eat some children. So that was enjoyable. If anybody out there hasn't been to the Mystic Aquarium, the beluga whales are the main attraction. They have 2 beluga whales, 2,000-pound white whales in an outdoor tank that covers about an acre. They seem to be pretty happy, and they're whales, so they're smart, and they interact with the people. The top of the water is not that far from the top of the plexiglass where you stand to look, and they will make faces at the people and spit water at them. And we watch some of their enrichment behaviors because they do a training sort of thing. They're very clear about the fact that they only use positive reinforcement. This is not a SeaWorld sort of situation. Whatever you feel about zoos or aquariums, is certainly very interesting and educational. But there are 2 whales, and one of them, the larger of the 2, whose name I think was Juno, was being very playful towards the end of the day. Like I said, spitting at the people and kind of making faces. They have these big bulbous foreheads that they kind of press up against the glass and do their little thing, and they swim around in a circle and then come back around. At one point, there was this little girl, old enough to walk, but not much else, maybe 1.5 or 2, standing by herself, because it was the end of the day and most of the people had left the aquarium. In the bottom, there are 3 planes of plexiglass. Well, I call it plexiglass, whatever it is, whatever the tank glass is. 3 planes, and the center one is a little deeper because you can walk down a few steps. And she's standing dead center in the middle of this thing by herself. Her parents, I think, are up on the steps. The larger of the 2 whales, the 2,000-pound whale, comes swimming by and opens up his mouth and swims down as if, like an illusion. His mouth went right around her as if he was eating her in one gulp, which I thought was hilarious. And the parents didn't seem to freak out about it too much. And a few people caught it and laughed, and some other people didn't. And then maybe 10, 15 minutes later, more people are crowded around that glass, and there's a parent holding a child of similar size, and the whale does a similar thing, comes over wide-mouthed, and again, the hinge of its mouth centers right on the crown of the child, again, on the other side of the plexiglass, but I'm like, I think that whale actually wants to eat children. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. I don't know if he's being playful or if he's hungry. I know they've been fed a lot of fish in their training exercises, but so that was the most recent highlight, a little something to share.
Beluga whales are on the small side, so maybe they can be kept more humanely than a giant killer whale.
Exactly, yeah. The larger whales are tens of times larger than these. These are basically large dolphins, but they are smaller than orcas for sure. But they are a toothed whale. They have plenty of room to swim around. They can swim out of sight in their tank, circle around, and come back. So they seem to have, and again, they do a lot of enrichment exercises with them, and the whales seem to have fun doing that. I personally enjoy zoos and aquariums, and certainly for my 8-year-old daughter, I think it's great for her to be exposed to all these different kinds of animals, and I realize that there are some concerns about habitat, but zoos and aquariums also do a lot of really good work with endangered species and with injured animals and re-releasing animals. Another thing we saw there at the aquarium was a tank of small harbor seals that were going to be released, that had been found, I guess, abandoned or injured or whatever, but were ready for release. And they were getting them in an environment in which they'd be ready, and they would release them back into the wild. So they do a lot of rehabilitation work there as well.
Like you, I'm ambivalent about zoos. They do a lot of great work. They make some positive contributions, particularly in the modern age when it's less just a concrete box with bars on it, which I feel like, in my childhood, that was still more prevalent, and the open habitat thing came into vogue when I was still a kid, but not much later than that. I remember...
We have seen that change arrive. I've seen that, even in my adulthood in some places, I have seen that change come to some zoos, and certainly for the better.
Exactly. I was about to say, I remember the Bronx Zoo advertising, they're making that transition, and if you go there, It's an awesome zoo, but you can see the old buildings, which are these wonderful Victorian buildings, but they're not exactly friendly. They have that Victorian feeling of Charles Dickens' dad would have been imprisoned in one of these for debt, and that's not a conducive atmosphere for any creature, man or beast. So then you can walk away from those buildings and go to these more open areas where you just look down and hope you spot something.
The brilliant thing that they did there, I think their best exhibit and the best environment that they provided is for their gorillas, where basically what they've done is they flipped it around. They put the people in the cage and let the gorillas have a habitat. The gorillas are the ones outside the windows, and the people are inside, basically in a tunnel that runs through their habitat. And so you get to see them. They've got large areas with fields, and they go over the top of the tunnel, and they hang out in their families, and there's babies and adults, and there's silverbacks kind of lurking in the corner like some Eisenhower-era dad. It's really fantastic. And I think that's kind of the genius move, is no, wait, we'll put the people in the cages and let the animals roam free. And that's really what they needed to do. And yeah, those right. Old buildings have that kind of old New York, and there's a certain nostalgia that can be attached to that idea, and the kind of the childhood version of like the Curious George Zoo, like you say, the concrete box with it's what you picture as a zoo when you're a kid, or at least we did, because I guess zoos still look like that. Right. I think though my daughter still reads a lot of Goodbye Gorilla or whatever the book is, or Goodnight Gorilla. These books,
I like that one.
That's what they show. That's kind of the elemental, that's the clip art version of a zoo that gets put in your head as a kid. So there's a little bit of nostalgia attached to that. But of course, it was horrific for the animals. And like I say, it's so great. There's a little zoo up near me here in New Jersey, the Turtleback Zoo, which when I was a kid, it's a great zoo now, and they keep expanding and expanding it. They've added giraffes now. They have this huge open plain for these giraffes to roam around. And again, it's the idea of that people are kind of on a boardwalk, and we walk into the giraffe's territory. The giraffes aren't really enclosed any more than a horse is enclosed in a pasture. And that's exactly what they should be doing. But when I was a kid, there was literally a tiger in a concrete cage. They don't have a tiger there anymore. They did actually, now they've added some lions, but the zoo keeps expanding. There was a point when I was in my 20s where I went to the zoo and it looked like it was about to fold. And since it's become very successful and like I say, just getting bigger and bigger. And it's great to see, because it's a great kind of small zoo that's an easy day trip for families in the area. And I brought my daughter to it countless times at this point.
It's a great zoo. I went there a lot as a kid. I've taken my own kids there. I guess the address is West Orange, New Jersey, right? I think.
But I mean, I went on a school trip, in nursery school there. My daughter went on a school trip in kindergarten there. It's a fantastic place. But the Bronx Zoo, we are, of course, in this area, we've got an embarrassment of riches when it comes to everything and options for things. The Turtleback Zoo is a great small zoo. We've got the Bronx Zoo. My wife and my mom and my daughter went to the Central Park Zoo recently. They no longer have the polar bear. Again, they're making smarter decisions, right. and they do a lot of rehabilitation work there as well, even though it's a tiny zoo. A lot of great options.
My favorite zoo story. There's a great book. You and your wife, and for people who don't know, Cliff's wife is a veterinarian, might enjoy this book. It's old, but and I haven't read it in a long time, but I enjoyed the heck out of it. It was called The Peaceable Kingdom. And actually, at some point after I read it, it was briefly a television series starring Lindsay Wagner as, I don't know, the Bionic Woman as the head veterinarian. But it's about the Philadelphia Zoo, which is the oldest zoo in the country, and also one of the smallest. They have at least at this time, they were constantly having budgeting problems, and the 80s were not a great time for any city in the country. They were trying to figure out what attraction they could bring in that they could afford and would get, more gate traffic in, much like a baseball team trying to sign a free agent, except it's not, Barry Bonds or Joe DiMaggio or something. We get a hippopotamus or an elephant. Well, what they settled on, because they're cute, are koala bears. But it turns out that koala bears are really boring. They're nocturnal, and so they received their koala bear and they put it in an enclosure, and there was a eucalyptus tree in the enclosure, and the koala bear promptly climbed to the most remote corner of the cage where it was hidden by leaves and fell asleep and stayed that way until everybody had gone home. So they'd advertised this koala bear. And again, this is much like signing your free agent, who then proceeds to go 0 for 50 in April, and everybody goes, well, what did I buy season tickets for? So people came in and were like, I came to see the koala bear, and I just see an empty cage. And they'd be like, no, it's there. It's this lump in the corner that you can't really see, but trust us. So they had all these disgruntled people and a problem to solve. And what they ultimately did was they opened up the cage and put the tree on a turntable. So that even though I don't think the koala bear felt or knew any different, it wasn't like it was going at 33 RPM. So even if it was dozing in the corner, if you'd stand around the cage and once a minute just whatever sound a koala bear passing you on a turntable would make, and people were happy with that. There's a snoring Doppler effect. We need a sound man here. That was a really good book. There's a lot of good stuff in it, and I have no idea if it's still in print, but that's the main thing I took away from it, was putting a koala on a turntable.
Not a bad idea. They could do that with the red pandas too, who are adorable but have a similar problem.
That's the one drag about all zoos, is that you go and you'll walk up to the fence line or the cage line or whatever it is, and it will say, "In this cage, the leopard," and then you look and it's just empty. Hello, Mr. Leopard? 2/3 of the time, it's that the leopard's there, and much like the koala, he's sacked out in the back somewhere, and you can kind of see a paw sticking out someplace. But sometimes you just never do spot it, and I always feel like such an idiot having spent 10 minutes staring at an empty cage, waiting for the leopard to show up, and it's just, no, the leopard's away this week.
But then every now and then you get lucky. We went to the last time we went to the Bronx Zoo, the polar bear, and it was in the summer. The polar bear was having the absolute time of his life, or her life, I'm not really sure. Probably his, because he was huge. Who knows? Maybe the female polar bears are bigger, so that happens in some species. Just rolling around in the water. He had a couple of different floats and balls, and he was doing that thing that kids do where you got a ball that floats like a basketball or kickball or something in the water, and you put it under your belly to try to get it to float and then let it pop up. He kept doing that with the ball, and he had like a life preserver he was trying to get around his neck, and I mean, we could have stayed there for an hour and watched this guy who was having a ball. And then other times you go and, like you say, where's the polar bear? Is he there? There's a cave in the back. Maybe he's in the cave. So
right.
You never know what you're gonna get.
Let's just climb down and see if we can find it. No, that leads to bad things. And this is a longer discussion. And like you said, the ethics of zoos is difficult. And when you see the polar bear having a good time, there is a risk of personification, and you don't know if he's really having a good time or he's just playing with that ball and he's saying like, yeah, you laugh at me, you bastards, if I had a pistol. And you always see these studies. And again, this may be something that your wife thinks about too. There was a study out either earlier this year or last year that said basically that all these times that people hug their dogs, yes, that if you actually monitor the dog in a way that you can feel the dog's heart rate and perspiration rate and things like that, most dogs do not necessarily enjoy the cuddling or it's pure, well-meant, pure affection that people are giving them, but a lot of times it's stressful. Similarly, your house cat, sometimes purring is a happy thing. Keep doing what you're doing. Other times purring is a stress reaction. And if you have an animal in your house for a long time, you get to know which is which. But there are times, undoubtedly, that we probably mistake one for the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might have been part of that story or something related to it about dogs and hugs, where they just have all these pictures of dogs being hugged, and they have this look on their... You look at these pictures of these dogs being hugged, and they have that look on their face of just like, help me, please, rescue me from this thing. This person feeds me, so I can't really bite them, but I'm miserable. But at the same time, like you say, my dog will come up to me regularly in the evenings, because in the evenings I'll park myself on the couch if I'm not writing or something else, and she'll come up regularly and sit next to me and look away from me, which is basically asking for pets, maybe not hugs. And there seems to be a line there between scratch me behind the ear, but don't wrap your arms around me, because that is a dominating behavior for a dog. And for dogs, which are pack animals, there's a lot of this kind of dominance submission stuff, and anytime you exert a dominant behavior on them, it's threatening to them in some way or another. Although at the same time, they say with puppies that you should, nothing violent in any way, but just establishing the pecking order of the pack in the house, which of course I don't need to do that anymore. She's all grown and older, but so that hugging is actually a dominant behavior, and that's one of the reasons it makes them feel so uncomfortable. But then when you mentioned the cat thing, and my big trick, of course, is teaching my daughter, who she's in that I want to love him and squeeze him and hug him and call him George stage with everything, to just, and the cat is very tolerant of her, because we had her before we had the cat, so the cat has learned to be more tolerant, I think, of her than of other people. But yeah, it's, when exactly is that purr or that behavior going to flip on you? And, the cat, when a cat wags its tail, is not a good thing. Yeah, that kind of thing. No, it's interesting. But when you mention the behaviors in the zoos, my wife actually in undergrad was a research assistant on a study, and it's what they call stereotypies, these repetitive behaviors that you'll see. And every now and then I'll see in a zoo, I'll see an animal exhibiting this sort of behavior because she keyed me into it. Oftentimes pacing is the most obvious one, pacing or panting, and these animals do these behaviors which... And pacing and panting doesn't necessarily look cute, but sometimes there are other behaviors where some people say, oh, look what a quirky animal, he's doing this cute thing, but he's doing it over and over again, and I'll see it and I'll say, no, that's not good. That's a kind of a form of acting out, like a stress thing, and the technical word for that is a stereotypy. Going around to the zoos and who knows, with an aquarium, who knows about a fish, whatever. They'll just swim in circles forever. Frankly, I don't really care that much. With the more evolved animals, yeah, I thankfully don't see that very often anymore. But the tiger stalking in the cage. He's not stalking. He's enclosed. He's caged in this little concrete bunker. And that behavior is stress.
Right.
It's not the mighty tiger stalking the people. He's like, help me, I'm trapped in this tiny little space, get me out of here. And thankfully many zoos have done that in one way or another.
Cliff and I will leave the animal kingdom behind for baseball right after this message from our sponsors. Or will we? Come back and find out. Since you've been gone, and since we last spoke, the calendar has obviously flipped to September, and I'm having a hard time deciding how I feel about this season as we come down to the wire here, because there's not that much in terms of races to be excited about. I feel like, and this is not going out on any huge limb, that 4 of the 6 divisions are decided because as we speak, they are in double-figure leads. The 2 that remain, the AL East, with the Yankees trailing the Red Sox by 3.5 heading into today's action, and the NL Central with the Brewers trailing the Cubs by 3.5. Seems likely that the status quo will remain. It's not a sure thing, but you'd be better off betting the under. And what's left is the wild card race, and the wild card teams are kind of lackluster too. Which of the wild card teams, were they to get in, and it seems like half the American League is still in it, would have the best chance of surprising us at this stage?
It's a good question. You know, my take on the American League wild card this year is basically that, and you'll recognize this, although you may not write, in fact, I know you don't, write as many kind of listy posts as I've seemed to find myself doing. Wherever it is I wind up, they just, editors love them and they're easy to churn out. And I try to say something with them, but nonetheless, I wind up doing what I called at SI, not necessarily with any sort of headline or anything, but like Five Guys posts, right? And at SI, it was always Five Guys. And now I'm over at Sports on Earth, and I've got a little more flexibility that, you know what? If there isn't a 5th guy, or maybe if there's a 6th and 7th guy, make it however many guys, wherever the cutoff is, or teams, or trades, or whatever it is you're listing, seasons. Put the cutoff where the cutoff naturally falls, as opposed to forcing 5, put the cutoff where it naturally falls. And I feel like we should be able to do that with the wild card in the American League and maybe even in the National League this year or every year, because there are 3 very good teams in the American League. The Yankees are probably a deserving wild card team, and that's about it. The rest of those teams really should not be participating in a playoff race. They are not good enough. They are average, mediocre teams, most of them with lousy pitching staffs or injury-riddled pitching staffs, or serious problems that really... To pay attention to that cluster of teams as a compelling playoff race, and we have to, because one of them will be there. At least one of them will be there. There's always the chance that the Yankees will stumble and fall out of the thing completely. Then they're in a coin flip game where anything can happen, so one of them could be in a best-of-5 series where anything could happen, and you never know what's going to, never know when you're going to get the 2006 Cardinals again. So we have to pay attention, but in reality, the cutoff is above all of those teams. With the exception of the Rangers and the Angels, none of them have a positive run differential? Well, because they're not lousy, but they're mediocre teams. They're just not that good. They shouldn't really be in the conversation. And so it kind of frustrates me. What team in there is dangerous? None of them are dangerous. None of the, the Rangers might have been interesting, but then they traded Darvish and now they've lost Beltre essentially for the season. The Royals had something going on, but petered out. Those teams at the bottom of the American League East aren't really anything. The Orioles looked like they were out of it, and now they look like they're in it, but they're not a good team. They don't have a good rotation. The Angels have brought some of their young guys. The Angels are kind of like putting the band back together with their starting rotation with Skaggs and Heaney, and they're going to bring Richards off, I think, in a day or two to have a start. Those are the guys who got hurt, who kind of took them out of serious contention a year or two ago. But, Heaney can't keep the ball in the ballpark, and Skaggs had 2 bad starts and then a run of good ones and then a few more bad ones, and who knows what to expect of Richards. And they made some compelling moves on some level, but they remain a mediocre team. None of these teams really should be in there. So I don't find any of them threatening in a larger series, but they may wind up getting there anyway. So I find that to be a fault of the system right now.
One team that I kind of can't help but root for in a scrappy underdog way is the Twins. And heading into today, they didn't have a positive run differential, but they didn't have a negative one either. They were just even, which is something because they had been outscored for most of the year, especially early on when they were ahead of the Indians and seemed like they were going to be the surprise team this year before they came back to earth. And one of the reasons I think that they're even now is that a few things have changed. They've got Jose Barrios in the rotation, and he's been pretty darn good. He hasn't been wholly consistent, but very good. And the other is Bartolo Colon, who has in certain senses been pounded over the lot. And if all things were equal, he probably would have an ERA about a run and a half higher than the roughly 4 he has now. But he's also done well for them, whether he deserves all the credit for it or not. And then 2 other things. One, Joe Mauer is hitting like the old Joe Mauer right now, and I think that is heartwarming because it's a shame that such a tremendous player, because of concussions and other things, hasn't been quite the same guy. He's been kind of Dave Magadan the last couple of years instead of Mickey Cochran, which is who he was. And then Byron Buxton, and for me, I said this on Twitter the other day, this is one of the stories of the year that this guy was hitting 150, and they stuck with him, and it helped that he was playing defense like a young Andruw Jones throughout. And now, since the All-Star break, he's just been killing the ball. And if he'd been doing this all year, we would be talking about him as an MVP candidate. So I feel like it's not quite the same Twins team that was so easy to dismiss earlier this year, even when they were winning.
That's true. And I was doing a lot of dismissing of them early on because Irvin Santana got off to that great start, and I was like, that's not going to last, and it didn't. Hector Santiago got off to a good start. He fell apart really fast, and now he's hurt. The offense Buxton was not doing the job, and things were not really coming together, and I just didn't believe in the team. Barrios has been a major change because he's a legitimate front of the rotation, and like you say, he's still establishing himself in the major leagues. He hasn't been consistent, but that was like, okay, now they have a pitcher. And Santana has remained decent, but nothing like the all-star start he had to his season. Buxton was sent down in mid-July, called back up on August 1st, and since then, he has hit 348, 385 on base, 661 slugging. He's been outstanding. And like you say, with his defense and his stolen base, he's stole a perfect 8 for 8 in stolen bases over that really a month and change. It's 32 games, 125 plate appearances. He's the total package when he can hit like that, and I'm hoping it's real. He's had some hot stretches before. I don't think he's had one quite this long and quite this good before. And certainly the talent's there, and he's still a young player, and you hope that this is the breakout we've been waiting for. He's not going to sustain, a 350 batting average and a 660 slugging, but if he can be a legitimate, even top of the order, doesn't have to be middle of the order, but top of the order hitter for them with the way he plays defense, he can be in that MVP conversation. He can be a key player like they've been expecting him to be. At the same time, the thing that has always bothered me about Buxton is his strikeout to walk ratios and his strikeout rates. His strikeout rates have gotten better, so it's not an absurd rate, but it's still high. But he only has 6 walks in that period, so it's a 4.5 strikeouts to walk. It's not great. It's better than it was, though, but it's still a little ugly. So it gives you some pause. There's a high batting average on balls in play in there. It's still a small sample at 125 plate appearances. you're hoping, you're really pulling for this guy because he's a highlight reel in center, and the defensive metrics back him up as being absolutely elite, one of the best there is. And he has kept himself above replacement level with essentially his glove alone throughout his brief major league career to this point. I'd like to see him sustain it, and it would be a lot of fun to see him playing, and Miguel Sano's power, and maybe Berrios getting the start over Santana in a wild card game would be kind of fun, or even if it's Colon, who, like you say, has pitched poorly but gotten good results, was kind of his MO for the past several years. The Twins are compelling now in a way that they weren't before, but they're still not, and really even the Yankees too. These are teams that are putting things together that should make them playoff teams a year or two from now, not this year. The Twins just don't feel like they're that team this year. And on some of the Yankees almost don't, but the Yankees have had some other things go right, and they've got some veteran guys to mix in with the young guys where you can see, okay, maybe that's a wild card team, and, if they happen to find some upside in the postseason, okay. But these other teams, I'm just not, you don't look at them and say, I want to see that team play in the postseason. They're these mediocre teams that one of them's going to wind up effectively backing into this spot.
Just to return to Buxton for a second, when I brought this up on Twitter, I said that it was kind of a miracle that the Twins had not given up on him, given how much he had struggled. By that, I mean that as of June 30th, say, from the beginning of the season to June 30th, which is 74 games, 251 plate appearances, he's hitting 195 with a 269 on base and a 283 slugging. I don't care about defense. I mean, that doesn't necessarily even out. And that's a lot of plate appearances for a young player who had not done well in some other trials. I'm going to get her name wrong because I actually don't know her name, but she's on Twitter, Maija, tweeting about the Twins quite often. And I don't know if there was an implied criticism or not, but she said, well, his talent was so obvious. What team would have given up on such an obvious prospect so quickly? And I really don't think it's quickly either in the time that he's had auditions or the time this year. I think that's actually a really long rope that he got. But my answer was George Steinbrenner, New York Yankees, anytime between 1975 and, say, 1993. And he did repeatedly. And you know that had Buxton come along somewhere about 1984, he would have been traded for Joe Niekro 2 months ago.
I'm not sure Buxton would have made the majors with the Yankees in the mid-'80s. I mean, as far as I understood it and experienced it, at least the back half of that decade with the Yankees, I mean, Steinbrenner saw, when a guy got a high prospect rating, he just saw it as a dollar sign. Somebody hung a dollar sign on this guy. I can use him to exchange for goods and services in the form of Ken Phelps or whoever the heck else it is. That's obviously the extreme. There are other teams like that. But the thing about Buxton that I think gave him, and I do think, I agree with you, he has gotten a relatively long rope. The fact that the Twins have not had high expectations going into these recent seasons, they've kind of overachieved in the times when they've made themselves relevant. The fact that, so it's kind of he's part of this wave, kind of a rebuild wave with Sano and Berrios and other guys. And his all-around talent. One guy I think of in recent years who I didn't feel at the time necessarily got a full shot was Dominic Brown with the Phillies, who had a bunch of injuries which laid him low and cut into his opportunities. And then when he had those opportunities, he didn't hit. But the thing about Dominic Brown is that he was a lousy outfielder. So if he wasn't hitting, he was nothing. He was killing you. Right. Whereas Byron Buxton, you say the thing, you don't care what the quality of his defense was, his hitting was so bad. And I don't disagree with you. The advanced stats, wins above replacement, all these defensive metrics tell us, according to those numbers, his defense was enough to keep him above replacement level despite the miserable hitting. And maybe there's some park adjustments in there as well, although Target has been playing a bit more neutral recently. We don't necessarily have to take those numbers at face value. Maybe they overstate how much his defense was keeping his overall performance up. But nonetheless, the only objective measures we have say that he was doing that. And again, the Twins could say, well, he may not be scoring runs on offense, or contributing to run scoring on offense, but he is saving us runs on defense. And the performance of their pitching this season in exceeding expectations there certainly, I think, contributed to that. Although there was early in the season, there was this idea of the Twins having this spectacular defense led by Buxton, and that was why they were winning. But if you looked at the team-wide numbers, that wasn't true. The Twins were pretty mid-pack when it came to defensive performance, whether it was defensive efficiency or anything else. Buxton was outstanding, but they had problems elsewhere, and they came out kind of in the middle of the pack, and their pitching came back down to earth, as mentioned earlier. It turned out to be more of a small sample fluke than outstanding defense like the Cubs had last year, was legitimate outstanding defense over the course of a full season. So I think the all-around contributions, the all-around athleticism, the fact that if he got on base, he was going to get extra bases for you, and he was going to get to extra outs in the outfield, that bought him more time. And again, we don't know if this is the real thing. We don't know if this is him becoming the player that they've always expected him to be. He could crash again in September. He could hit well through the end of the season and come out in April and stumble. We don't know that he's necessarily arrived. But certainly every time he has a month like he just had in August, it's going to buy him a few more months down the line, at least until he gets into his arbitration years, which isn't until 2019 and beyond.
This is going to certainly buy him, obviously, the rest of the season and probably a good chunk or all of next one, because if he does anything like this, as you said, 330 and a 650 slugging is not sustainable. That would make him Tris Speaker. But anything in that vicinity, or frankly a good deal below it with that kind of base running and defense, you're set for life.
And just looking now, his Baseball Reference wins above replacement is almost at 5.
Yeah, he leads the team.
He's had like one good month at the plate, but all the else that he can do, if those numbers are to be believed, he's a star. He's not just viable, he's a star already. And if he can, and that's with an OPS below average. If he can get his hitting just to kind of like something you would expect from a number 2 hitter, you're talking about a guy who with his overall performance can be an MVP level player. But then the question is, okay, so he's 23 now, and he has all these amazing skills, but how long is he going to play defense like that? And how long is his base running going to be? How long is he going to be one of the fastest players in the game? At some point in his mid to late 20s, those are going to fade and the hitting is going to become more important. And of course, that's when he's going to get close to those free agent years. So the picture keeps changing as time moves forward, but it's certainly very interesting right now.
Well, some guys do last. I did sort of a light, not even a study, just a sorting of the stats on this fairly recently, because I had that idea that these guys, particularly these fast outfielders who had these 25 run saved seasons, couldn't repeat that often because your legs are always going back on you every minute. As we are all aging every second all the time, speed is constantly ebbing. And there's also a distribution of balls in play issue, and just a lot I felt had to go right. But it turns out that I was wrong about that guys do sometimes, not always. I mean, Austin Jackson's an example, right? Austin Jackson had like a 30-run saved season, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, and never had any stats like that again. Conversely, somebody like Andruw Jones, who I mentioned before, or Devon White, they just kept going, and it was well into their 30s that I'm stumbling because I'm questioning myself on Andruw Jones, but let's stay with that.
Jones petered out right about 30, but that's okay.
Yeah, but, I mean,
but he came up so young. Okay. He came up as a teenager, so it was 11 years or something that he was that good.
Right? Yeah, he kept it up time-wise for a long time. At least statistically, Devon White did too, and that certainly kept him playing, despite the fact that he was incredibly inconsistent on offense as well. So, I don't know. I mean, a guy like that, as long as he avoids major leg injuries and doesn't tear any hamstrings or slip on a base and tear up his knee, he could be very valuable for a long time to come.
Very well could be.
As long as we're in the AL Central, we don't have to dwell on this that long, but each time that we've talked about heading into the trade deadline, we were talking about the Royals' gamble in terms of whether to deaccession some of their coming free agents or whether they chase the fact that they were on a hot streak at that time. They chose to chase. They are now a game under 500. They are 3 behind the Twins for the second spot in the loss column, but it's not insurmountable, but they do seem to be heading in the wrong direction. So now that we have the benefit of hindsight, what do we think of what the Royals did?
Well, I mean, I wrote about this for Sports on Earth at the time. I forget exactly when at the time was, but sometime in July when this decision was coming down on the Royals. And so I'm going to try to suggest that I first guessed here, which is that it just, the chance wasn't worth it. That what the Royals are facing, and I think they're in a very unique position. Of course, the ship has sailed in terms of the decision that they had. Should they sell and try to restock the farm system, or should they stay in and try to get one last big run out of this group, this core group that won 2 consecutive pennants a couple years ago? That decision, they've made it now. But heading into it, I just didn't see enough in the team that I thought it was worth it. All these guys on their roster who could leave as free agents and leave them with close to nothing. Maybe they'll get a couple of picks out of the deal because they are a revenue sharing receiving team, and a couple of those guys, maybe Moustakas and Hosmer, will get the $50 million contracts that are required to trigger under the new CBA some sort of compensation for free agents. But I just felt like the opportunity to restock their farm system was so essential because of that many guys leaving, and because their farm system has really been drained to a large degree. There's not much in the Royals farm system right now that you can look forward to. And having not cashed in those guys to restock it, if they leave as free agents, yeah, maybe you'll get some picks. But those are picks. Those are guys who might be 5 years away from the major leagues if they pan out at all. So what the Royals really did was they traded maybe the next 5 years of their franchise for a run at a wild card chance this year that looks like it may not pan out.
Of those free agents, the one I think is the most dangerous to signing teams, this is getting way ahead of ourselves into the hot stove season now, but I keep thinking about this. Lorenzo Cain is 31 this year, so whatever you sign him for, you're going to get age 32, age 33, age 34, and I assume he'll be looking for more than that. His game is not about patience. It's not necessarily about overwhelming power. His career high is 16 home runs, and so he has to hit for an average. When, say, last year he only hit 287 in 103 games, that meant that the on-base percentage was 339, the slugging was 408, and he played good enough defense that was still a net positive for the team, but that does not necessarily make a star overall. This year he's a little more, for lack of a better term, star-ish, but you're gambling that batting average stays up over 290 if you're the signing team at an age in which it typically doesn't. This is a guy, I don't know what his market's going to be or how many years he'll get offered, but someone is, I feel like, really going to eat it on the back end of that deal.
The thing that worries me about Cain, and I think age is number one going into his age 32 season, but he's also a guy who's never really been able to stay too far away from the disabled list. When he was a Brewers prospect, injuries were always the concern. Would he stay healthy enough to fulfill his potential? Even after he got to the Royals in the Zach Greinke trade, there was that question lingering around him. He's never played more than 140 games in any season, not counting postseason. Last year you mentioned the numbers were down a little bit, but he also only played 103 games. There were injuries in there. There are always injuries in there with Lorenzo Cain. So if you're talking about a guy who's getting into his mid-30s, whose game is based around all-around athleticism, because stolen bases are a big part of his game. He's 24 for 26 this year, stole 28 2 years in a row when the Royals won those 2 pennants. And his play in the field, in center field mostly, if that athleticism combined with aging and injuries, that's not a pretty picture right there. So I worry less about the batting average. So certainly with age and injury and decline, that does seem likely to fall. But 287 isn't that far removed from the 293 he's hitting this year. Over the past 4 years combined, he's been 298. In his career, even with some, down years early on, he's at 288. He's basically a 290-plus hitter consistently. And yes, that consistency will start to fall off, but I worry more about the condition of his legs and his ability to stay in the lineup. So yeah, I think any contract of any real length, more than maybe 3 years for Lorenzo Cain, is going to hurt a lot. And even at 3 years, and I expect him to get more than that, but even at 3 years, you kind of wonder if that age 34 season is going to be one that the team's going to regret.
One other guy to stick with, 31-year-old coming free agents in the AL Central, that is really intriguing to me right now because he's having a really strong finish, is Carlos Santana. We saw last year that there wasn't very much of a market for slow first base types. That's certainly Santana. He finished the first half hitting 238 with a 340 on base, 409 slugging. He still had the walks going for him, but everything else wasn't working. Since then, I keep saying heading into today, because we're taping this when game action is going on, he has been hitting 284 with an on-base percentage of nearly 400 and a slugging percentage, and he has homered today, pushing, I don't know, about 575, let's say. So there's still life in the old boy yet, but he's not Keith Hernandez on the fielding job. There's not a lot of openings for first baseman, and he too has never been particularly consistent. So I'm going to be very curious if he goes back to Cleveland or somebody else makes him an offer, but he's an odd bird, and so he's going to be a difficult fit.
Yeah, I don't see a lot happening with Santana. I mean, you mentioned these kind of powerful DH types not drawing a lot, but that's kind of your Mark Trumbo and your Chris Carter types who also don't walk. Whereas Santana's chief, his number one category is the base on balls, even more than home runs. He's only hit 30 home runs once in a season. I don't think he's going to get there this year. If he hit one today, he's at 22. His walks are outstanding. 90 walks or more. 6 seasons in a row. This year he's at a bit lower than that, but he's also missed some time. And you look at his walk to strikeout ratios, and it's very close to 1-to-1. So this is not a guy who's striking out 180 times and hitting 35 home runs. This is a guy whose strikeouts are below average in terms of less frequent than average, who's going to walk 90 plus times a year, and he'll get you those 25 homers, but he's not going to do anything for you on defense. I mean, really, I wouldn't want him even playing first base for my team. He's a DH who's going to walk a lot. That might be a player that the Rays might be interested in, or some sort of heady team looking for a bargain on a short contract. I don't see him getting anything big. In terms of coming back to Cleveland, the Indians have put him at first base over Edwin Encarnacion, which tells you how much the Indians have liked the idea of Encarnacion in the field. So if that's the situation, I think they would like something better than Santana at first base, at least defensively. They might be interested in a reunion there if Santana doesn't find the market to his liking. But I don't see him being on the higher end of the free agent hitter contracts this offseason.
They do have a first baseman at Double-A named Bobby Bradley. He's a left-handed hitter, has good power. There's no guarantee he's going to hit 220 in the major leagues, however, so I'm not sure that they're just going to clear the decks for him, particularly when he's a full level away. It's wrong in a way. Now, again, there's a danger in giving any 31-year-old or coming 32-year-old a long-term contract because, as we were just saying about Lorenzo Cain, that can be very difficult to deal with on the back end when you start with somebody who's useful and he turns into a paperweight. The thing is, though, that a lot of AL teams really tank the DH spot. They don't want to spend money on the position. The contrast, though, is between having Soup du Jour at DH and having David Ortiz at DH, which the Red Sox had for many years until this year, and that was a huge advantage to them. And so Santana, I think, in that sense, if he is just quote-unquote a DH, he's undervalued to an extent because a lot of teams don't get a whole lot out of it.
That's true. I think the DH is a largely misunderstood position on some level because of this assumption that you can have a great hitter like a David Ortiz, stash him at DH, and he never has to play the field. It isn't that great. Or maybe some people think to the earlier days of a player like the late Don Baylor, who fit best at DH and was an outstanding hitter there, or somebody like a Paul Molitor, who had so many injuries and never really stuck at a single infield position, so he wound up playing a lot of DH and having a great career. Or even a Harold Baines, which is an Edgar Martinez type, a player who has a significant injury early in his career, which impedes his ability to play the field. But his bat is so good, you just keep him at DH forever, and he'll just keep producing for you. There aren't that many of those guys around. Baseball players, despite the stereotype, tend to be good athletes. And the good athletes you want in the field. You don't want to put a Carlos Correa or a Corey Seager or a Byron Buxton at DH. Mike Trout's a guy who you might think, just looking at the way he hits, but he's an outstanding all-around athlete. Even Bryce Harper. I'm not going to just name the best players in the game, but the idea is that having a guy who fits that particular set of circumstances where he's not viable in the field at a particular position, look, if a guy can hit really well and can carry a position defensively, you're going to put him there. And there's this thought, certainly about young players, that you don't want to stash a young player at DH because you're kind of cutting him off at the knees in terms of his overall value, either the overall value you can get from him or the overall value that he can. I'm kind of rambling a little bit.
No, you're right, because you're not rambling at all, because it's a complete inversion of the way that problems should be approached. Because on any team, whether we're talking manager, general manager, whoever, the goal is to best exploit every player in the way that he's most helpful to the team. If that's a David Ortiz, then you say, well, he has a terrific bat and a not so terrific glove, and we have a choice. Let's not ask him to do what he's not good at doing. Let's ask him to do what he is good at doing, and the DH position allows us to do that. that is not at all a knock on a David Ortiz type of player, because there are very few players, and he was not one of them, in all of baseball history who were so abysmally bad with the glove but hit to his level that a team said, no, sorry, we can't use a 300 hitter with 40 home run power because you just don't have the range around the bag. That wasn't going to happen. When they talk about limiting a young player, no, let's be realistic about this and say, let's just ask him to do what he can do. Similarly, Edgar Martinez. Edgar Martinez was made a DH not because he couldn't field, but because he got hurt a lot. Paul Molitor, same deal. Had there been no DH, the Mariners or some other team, if they had to trade him to make it happen or whatever, they would have stuck him at first base and they would have lived with it. And Tino Martinez would never have been a Mariner. That's all that it is. So it's a legitimate position, I think, and to not want to spend the money on it, to look at a player like Carlos Santana and say, well, all he can do is DH, is, I think, a very backwards way of looking at it, because that's something you need. Whether it's all he can do or it's not, that's something you need him to do.
And then there's also this idea that some teams have where they're like, oh, well, DH will help us rest our aging veterans and we can cycle through. But basically what you're doing there is you're taking your utility infielder or your fourth outfielder or some amalgam of those guys, your backup catcher, the top three guys on your bench, and you're making that player an everyday player. So that guy is your DH, essentially. Your DH is, even though he's playing other positions, because you're taking whoever it might be, your veteran starting third baseman, your veteran starting first baseman, your corner outfielders, whatever, your catcher, and putting them at first base, one there every day, then your actual DH bat is the guys replacing them, and you're not getting the kind of production that you could get if you had a real DH and just sat those guys instead. A quality offensive DH like a Carlos Santana type is going to outproduce the top three guys on your bench, unless you might happen to be this year's Dodgers. And there's always this assumption that the DH position is so productive throughout the league, and it's just not true. If you look at the league splits, go by year, and DH is not only below first base and right field and left field, but it's often kind of mid-pack in terms of the production that's gotten out of position, which is there purely to provide offense.
Our time together has flown by with insane rapidity. I wanted to touch on one story that was upsetting to me, and it's one of those things where you want to laugh so you don't cry, and yet laughing seems insensitive. The New York Mets announced today that David Wright will be undergoing surgery to repair his right rotator cuff. This about 24 minutes after he had begun his latest minor league rehab stint. As I think everybody knows, the Mets signed him to a million-year deal, which doesn't expire until 2020, after the 2020 season. He has not played a full season since 2014. He is now 34 and has played a grand total of 75 games for 2015, 2016, and 2017 combined, the 2017 number being 0. And it seems likely that his career is over, or if it is not over, that what eventually comes back to the baseball field will be vastly debilitated from the proto Hall of Famer that we saw at the heart of his career. I'm really down about this. Not that I really ever expected him to come back, but I just really feel for this guy, because this was a tremendous career that just self-aborted, as soon as he hit 31.
It's certainly a sad end to see. He's one of those guys who, when he was a prospect, he was expected to be a franchise player. And then he came up and he actually was that guy. A guy who really did everything well, had some odd seasons in his career where his power vanished in 2009 and the shape of his game kind of changed a little bit, but a Gold Glove winner, a Silver Slugger, a many-time All-Star. He's one of the greatest players in franchise history, and for a first-round pick who was supposed to be that, he was that. Even if it turns out that his career is over and his last full season was at age 31, he only played 13 years, 3 of which were very partial, another one of which was only 102 games. Looking back at David Wright years from now, you're going to see what a good career this guy has had. It's unfortunate that it does appear to be coming to an end this way. There's the temptation to bring in all of the Mets-related negativity with that. The Mets finally got this franchise player and something busted up on them again. He's second all-time in the team in wins above replacement. He's a 50-win player. He's basically had a career on par with that of Ron Cey or Stan Hack. Like you said, he was on a Hall of Fame course early in his career. Another thing that stands out to me about David Wright is that he could wind up being the one great Met who spent his whole career with the team. The Mets haven't had that. And again, that's kind of the Mets being the Mets. They trade Nolan Ryan, they trade Tom Seaver, Darryl Strawberry, and Dwight Gooden go bust on them. The other guys are late career additions, whether it's Piazza or Carter, Beltran even. All these great players have come in and out, but they haven't had one guy who's been there for his whole career, and David Wright is that guy. I was looking at retired numbers recently to continue to bounce around on tangents related to David Wright. The Mets have only retired, I think, 3 or 4 numbers. Is Gil Hodges, who was a great manager and a great New York player, not for the Mets, although briefly in their early years. But he passed away, and they retired his number the next year. Obviously, Tom Seaver, he got into the Hall of Fame. Casey Stengel, he got into the Hall of Fame. He was their first manager. And then recently, they finally added a number to that, and it was Mike Piazza, and they did it when he got into the Hall of Fame. Well, David Wright, even though he's closer than you think, is probably not going to go into the Hall of Fame. But I think he might break that pattern. I think that number 5 has got to go up on that wall as the one great Met to spend his whole career with the team.
He's going to be looked at because of that finish as a disappointment. And you mentioned his career WAR, and to use that as a shorthand for achievement. He did not have a second half to his career. Again, we hope he does come back, and he may yet add to this, as unlikely as it seems. But he is 17th all-time in career WAR for third baseman, which for half a career, and an amazing accomplishment, really. The list begins with Mike Schmidt, who had almost 107, Eddie Matthews, Adrian Beltre still going, Wade Boggs, Chipper Jones, Brooks Robinson, Ron Santo, Scott Rowland, underrated, Greg Nettles, also underrated, Buddy Bell, Ken Boyer, Home Run Baker, Sal Bando, Robin Ventura, Ron Cey, Stan Hack, David Wright. It's an impressive place to be on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, without that second half to his career. Stan Hack was a guy I think at one point you could make a Hall of Fame argument for back in the early days when third basemen were so badly underrepresented before that class of Schmidt and Boggs and Brett and all those came through. Ron Cey had a great career as kind of a Hall of Very Good type of guy and the longest running infield with the Dodgers, and then he was on the 84 Cubs team. If you grew up in the 70s and into the early 80s, Ron Cey was a star player who was always on television. David Wright, I think, is one of those guys. Off-field stuff we tend to ignore. The Mets made him the captain. He called him Captain America when he's in the WBC, and I think his performance in the WBC should really be counted here as well. We were talking about a team of the best American players in the World Baseball Classic, and David Wright was a star on that team.
As you know, I tend to really dislike Hall of Fame arguments in my old age, try to stay away from them. But Stan Hack is one of my pet guys who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. Great leadoff hitter, 301 career hitter. Played in 4 World Series for the Cubs, and how many guys can say that? And was a tremendous performer in 2 of those World Series. Scored over 100 runs 6 times, maybe 7 actually. 1,239 lifetime, almost 2,000 games in the majors. He was a stolen base guy when people weren't stealing bases. Was popular. It's very strange that he didn't get more respect than he's gotten from the Hall of Fame to this point, and I wouldn't be surprised if some Veterans Committee put him in someday. But he, in my opinion, would be a deserving guy to get a plaque.
Hack's an interesting guy because, I guess on some level it shows my age, and I mentioned before, kind of before Schmidt and Brett and Boggs and more recent guys like Rowland or whoever have kind of crowded the third, Chipper Jones certainly, because he's going to go in next year, in Beltre, crowded the third base position, which was underrepresented, and now Santo's in, thankfully, and I think we're going to see some of those other guys I just mentioned go in, and third base is going to start to catch up. But when Schmidt and Brett and Boggs were all still active, and I remember as a kid looking at great third basemen and how, there was a time when people thought Pie Traynor was the best third baseman of all time. Pie Traynor probably shouldn't even be in the Hall of Fame, but Stan Hack. And so at the time I was like, who should be, though? Stan Hack. Underappreciated because getting on base was a big part of his game. He had a .394 on base percentage for his career, which was 93 points higher than his .301 batting average. He did hit .301. But he didn't get a lot of respect from the voters. One year in 1950, he almost got to 5%. This was back before the 5% rule was instigated, I believe, but really never above 3% any other year. I don't think there's going to be a strong veterans case for him necessarily. And like I say, I think because there's so many good third basemen have come in the past couple decades or 3 or 4 decades now, that it's a much more crowded position. And a guy like Stan Hack, who based on the history of third baseman through 1960, I think should have absolutely been in the Hall of Fame. But so many good ones have come since him that I'm not sure that's ever going to happen.
All right, so we've Pac-Manned our way through our time. real fast, lightning question. Don't think too hard on this. Who is the National League MVP this year?
Impressionistically, without looking at the stats, which I admit to having not done, I love Paul Goldschmidt because he does everything. Because he's an outstanding defender, an outstanding base runner, stealing bases as a power-hitting first baseman who hits for average, who hits for power, who gets on base. He's the total package. Now, is he having the best season out of the other guys he's competing with, whether it's Votto or even a Max Scherzer or Giancarlo Stanton, who's been coming on like gangbusters? I can't really say. We've got another almost a month to go, little less than a month to go, so it could be any of those guys, and maybe somebody else can come in on the rail and pass everybody. But in terms of the player who fits that profile for me, who has had a season that puts him in the conversation, is Paul Goldschmidt.
We will leave it there for now, revisit at the end of the season. I do feel good that Nolan Arenado no longer has the solo lead in RBIs, because that's always a temptation to certain people, and Stanton getting hot means that he has tied Arenado, and I think that eliminates the big argument for him because he's not really having that great of an offensive year, and the Rockies have been rowing backwards really, really hard since the All-Star break. So could be Goldschmidt, could be Stanton, could be Joey Votto, could be, as you said, Scherzer, although that hasn't been the trend in recent years. So we'll see.
We will see. Although team performance doesn't matter, Steven.
I still like narrative, damn it.
The Rockies rowing backwards doesn't matter.
I had a feeling you were going to say that, but I still like narrative.
Going to jump on it every time. Yeah, I understand. No, it's because you're a writer. And so am I. And it's much more, it's easier and it's more fun to tell the story. And really, it's more fun as a reader to read a story rather than to read, this guy's better because he did, he was 2% better in this category and 2% better in that, 3% better in that category, and 1% better on the bases. And that's not as compelling as he got in the trenches and pulled his team to a wild card berth. But the fact of the matter is that value, in my opinion, and I like my opinion, is absolute. A guy produces so much value on the baseball field, and that's what matters, and that's what should be judged. That's why Votto's in the conversation. That's why Stanton's in the conversation. And the rules specify pitchers are in the conversation, and that it's the quality of offense and defense that defines value. That's in the rules handed out by the Baseball Writers Association of America. And sure, look, if a guy on a first-place team or a guy on a wild card team wins the MVP, you're going to work that narrative in there. But in terms of the decision on the ballot, it shouldn't be part of it.
I just still feel like there's a distinction between the player who has the season of the year, which could be an award too and should be. There should be a Team of the Year award too. But it's contextual. And let's just say I'm very hungry and you hand me a hammer. Well, I'm going to starve to death. If I need to build a house and you hand me a banana, I am going to not have a roof over my head when it rains. If you switch it, obviously they're the greatest things ever, the hammer and the banana. But they are similar in shape, but not in application if you're not using them to the right purpose.
I'm gonna argue with your metaphor there, Stephen, because I do not believe there is a baseball player who is a good baseball player who is the equivalent of a hammer to a hungry person. Unless, of course, that hammer gets you over to the shop window where you can break the glass and get the bread.
Well, you hit the guy who hands you the hammer, and then you just indulge in a little cannibalism.
One metaphor that I like to use is that it's money in your wallet, right? You've got a $100 bill, and it doesn't matter what other bills you have or how much they're worth, because $100 is worth $100. Now, maybe you need $1,000 to buy what you're going to buy, but $100 is still getting you $100 closer, regardless of whether or not you get all the way there. It's worth that much, and it is heading in the right direction. A baseball player who contributes whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be defined by wins above replacement, but just to use that as a shortcut, if a player is worth 9 wins, he's worth 9 wins, and that's in the right direction. He's going to feed you those 9 wins if you're hungry. The fact that you're not going to get all the sustenance you need is the fault of the other players, not him. He's not a hammer when you're hungry. He is just a smaller piece of the banana than you might have wanted. But he's still going to feed you. So I think, like I said, I think it value is absolute. on the baseball field. If a player is helping his team win, it doesn't matter how many wins the team actually has. He's still helped them be better than they would have been without him.
All right, I can't argue with that, at least not right now. So to be continued. Because I think it can work both ways. It just really depends how you define your terms. And I do think your argument is correct factually. It's really correct in every way that I can't argue with it.
You're right, but I disagree.
No, I think you're right. Maybe what it is I need a different award is what I think. I think it is the most valuable player who actually made it into battle or something like that. I don't know. But on that note about undersized bananas, which is a topic ripe, if you'll pardon the pun, for further exploration, Cliff, thank you very much for coming back from vacation and leaping in here with many interesting facts about fruit and zoo animals and whales and also baseball.
Yeah, I had fun. Thanks, Steve. We're looking forward to the next one.
By Grabthar's hammer, we've made it to the end of another program. You can read Cliff at Sports on Earth and follow him on Twitter at Cliff Corcoran. It's the vanilla ice cream of Twitter handles. As for me, you can read me at FanRag and follow me on Twitter at GoStephenGoldman. Why Go Stephen Goldman? Because go big or go home Stephen Goldman felt like too much pressure. As you've no doubt noticed, we have a sponsor now, but nonetheless, this episode is brought to you by the number 10. My producer, King Midas in reverse, tells me he's having some marital problems. When his wife responds to what he's doing in bed, he says, "Shh, you'll fuzz the meter." I said, funny, you never care about that here. Our theme song, which you have heard throughout the episode, and in fact are listening to now, was composed by myself and Dr. Richard Mooring. And here's the thing about Rick. He can juggle really, really well, and I can't. Not at all. And just so you know what that means, in the 1980s high school movie of your life, the guy who can juggle is the leading man, and you're the comedy relief. That's destiny. That's just the way it works. It's a simple test. All you need is 3 balls. Well, I'm about to go off and write a new song about free agency called I Want You to Want Me As Much As I Want You. If you just take my money, we'd be living a lie, but maybe I'm desperate enough to accept that. Assuming I get that done in 7 days, I'll be back next week with David Roth, and we'll have more tales and discussion from inside the infinite inning.